The air in the hangar was dry, sharp, and heavy with expectation. Beneath the steel rafters and blinking panels, footsteps echoed with the weight of rank and reputation. It was the kind of place where every crease on a uniform, every patch stitched onto a sleeve, told a story, and where a new story was about to begin, though no one there realized it yet. She walked in alone. Her boots tapped against the hangar floor with a confidence that didn't quite match the assumptions others had made about her. Slim frame, ponytail pulled tight, green flight suit, perfectly regulation, but spotless, like it hadn't seen real turbulence. Helmet under her arm. No swagger, no chit-chat. Just calm, collected presence. The brass didn't like that. One of them, a grizzled senior officer with a chest full of medals and a voice like gravel, leaned to the man beside him and whispered loud enough for half the room to hear. That her? Echo 5? What is the gamer tag? Laughter broke out like a cold front rolling through the room, sharp, dismissive, the kind meant to cut deep and silence anyone who dared to believe she belonged. Several of the older pilots turned in their chairs, smirking behind their flight logs, eyes flickering over her like she was a child who'd wandered into the wrong movie. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile either, just met the general's eyes, General Rickard, the man who hadn't flown a mission in years but commanded respect from DC. To every forward base in the world and answered flatly, "Call sign assigned during tactical evaluation, sir. Protocol Echo, 5th Group Sortie." Rickard snorted. "Right, tactical evaluation. Let's hope you fly better than you explain things. Planes don't care how pretty you are." Louder laughter this time. A few heads nodded approvingly, as if that jab restored the natural order of things. She simply turned and walked toward her jet. No words. No defense. Most people would have crumbled under that kind of ridicule, but she didn't even blink. And that's when the first crack in the assumptions appeared, not a loud one, but a subtle fracture in the narrative forming around her. Because not one of those men knew what she'd already done to get here. No one knew that behind that unshaken calm was a pilot who'd logged more hours in simulators than most of them had in the air. Or that her real training didn't come from flight school manuals or sanitized war games, but from her father, Colonel Monroe, a legend in his own right. A man who once flew canyon runs blindfolded just to prove a point, and who taught her not from textbooks, but from the wind. But they didn't know that. All they saw was a girl with a code name they didn't respect, standing alone in a room full of men who thought the sky belonged to them. The thing was, she never wanted to take it from them. She just wanted to fly. The day's drill wasn't supposed to be special. A routine flight simulating enemy engagement, formation integrity, evasive tactics under pressure, 6 pilots, all F-16S. Nothing too flashy until news broke that General Rickard was making an unannounced visit. Suddenly, the air got heavier. These drills, while technically routine, became performances when someone like Rickard watched. And today, the eyes weren't just on formation or response time. They were on her. She was the youngest, the only woman, the only one with a call sign that sounded like a joke. One of the older pilots, Major Kelton broad-shouldered, confident in that way men get after decades of being praised, glanced at her across the tarmac and drew a thumb across his neck, mouthing the words, "You're dead?" Not to be cruel, just the kind of cruel that feels normal in places like this. Still, she didn't look away, just turned her face toward the horizon and let the sun hit her like she belonged to it. The jets lined up in formation, the tower buzzed with final checks, and from the steel shadow of the hangar, someone muttered, "She's gonna get eaten alive out there." Maybe that was true. Or maybe they were just wrong. Because what no one knew, not Rickard, not Kelton, not even the seasoned tower operators, was that this so-called rookie had flown these drills hundreds of times in private. That her father had guided her through uncharted airspace, taught her how to listen to the shift in pressure, to read the clouds like language. That she didn't rely on machines to tell her what was happening, she felt it. That's why, years ago, during a simulator failure, she completed an entire mission with no sound, no warning systems, just her eyes and instincts. And from that day forward, the name Echo 5 stuck. Not as a mockery, as a memory. Today, though, that name still sounded like a joke to the ones watching. But soon, they'd learn why that call sign wasn't something to laugh at. And by the time her boots touched the ground again, they'd never laugh at it or her again. The roar of the F-16 engines swallowed the Nevada air as the 6 jets lifted one by one, slicing into the morning sky like silver blades. Formation locked. Altitude steady. Wind clear. From the tower, everything looked perfect. For 10 full minutes, the drill was textbook. They banked left and right as a unit, maintained formation in a tight 2x3 grid, and checked radar sync without error. If someone had taken a snapshot of that moment, they would have seen symmetrizics, aircraft, clean lines, routine perfection. But sometimes perfection hides the storm just beneath it. At position 6, tail end Charlie, Echo 5 flew her jet like she was born in it. Every movement precise, clean, with no hesitation. While others made minor course corrections with small jerks of the stick, hers moved fluidly as though the plane wasn't something she controlled, but something that listened to her. From the tower, the supervising flight lead leaned forward slightly. Echo 5's tight, he muttered to himself, too tight. And then came the twist. Unbeknownst to the pilots, the training protocol had been modified that morning just before takeoff. A new AI-guided drone, coded as a surprise adversary, had been added to the field. Simulated missiles, erratic maneuvering. The idea was to test how pilots would react to chaos without advance warning. At 11:12 a.m., chaos arrived. Bogey inbound, 10 o'clock high, barked one of the pilots. The sky shifted. A black shape streaked across the cloud linear, simulated enemy drone. Its path unpredictable, its speed abnormal. The F-16S adjusted, pulling into new vectors, splitting the grid like a practiced dance. Echo 5, maintain rear. Do not break protocol, came the command. But something was wrong. The drone wasn't following projected patterns. It dove lower sharper, faster cutting into the lower atmosphere, and accelerating in a way even the simulations hadn't expected. Then it veered directly toward one of the jets. Major Kelton. His plane dipped suddenly, dropping 200 feet below formation. Red light. I've got a red light. Kelton's voice cracked across the comms. Fuel systems compromised, I'm venting. Losing thrust. Panic doesn't sound like shouting. Panic sounds like a man trying not to shout. Regroup, the tower ordered. Return to base immediately. Echo 5, stay clear. She didn't respond. At least, not with words. What Elena did next wasn't in any manual. It wasn't part of the drill. It wasn't even part of most pilots' imagination. She banked left. Hard. So hard. The rest of the formation jolted at the sudden shift in pressure. Her aircraft screamed under the G-forces, but she pushed through it, dove toward Kelton's jet like she was chasing her own shadow. What the hell is she doing? Someone shouted from the tower. She's not following protocol. But in the cockpit of Echo 5, everything was quiet. Echo 5 initiating vector tether, she said calmly. The phrase meant nothing to anyone listening. There was no such maneuver. No one had ever used those words before. But what she did made the phrase unforgettable. She pulled her jet alongside Kelton's crippled one within 30 feet. So close the turbulence between them bucked her wings. So close that a single misjudged draft could have thrown both jets into a death spiral. But she didn't misjudge anything. Instead, she mirrored Kelton's angle, adjusted her own descent, used her jets slipstream the pressure, and airflow to counterbalance his dive. It was insane, a suicidal ballet in the air. And it worked. Kelton's fall slowed, stabilized, just enough for emergency refueling to arrive and pump a critical dose of fuel into his tank, enough to get him home. From the tower, there was silence. No one knew what to say. Even Rickard, who had barked commands with full authority minutes earlier, stood still, stone-faced. And then, as if nothing had happened, Echo 5 guided her jet back into formation and returned to base. She landed last. The tarmac shimmered beneath her wheels as she taxied to a stop. No one clapped, no one cheered. But every pair of eyes in that hangar followed her as she climbed down, helmet under her arm, flight suit streaked with sweat and dust. She didn't look around, didn't wait for applause. She walked right past them all, straight-backed, eyes forward. Because she hadn't flown that way for credit. She'd flown that way because someone was falling, and she knew how to stop a fall. That afternoon, a note appeared on the base bulletin board unusual, given that announcements were usually digital now. It was handwritten. Taped in a corner, below the maintenance schedules and mess hall notices. Echo 5 maneuver, under review. Major Kelton grounded pending system inspection. Echo 5 deviation from protocol-saved aircraft and civilian safety perimeter. Action reclassified as emergency judgment. Lives saved. Command. At the bottom, scribbled in Penno signature, no name were the words. Real pilots don't follow manuals, they write them. In the days that followed, the silence around Echo 5 shifted. People still didn't talk to her much, but they no longer looked through her. They looked at her. And that was enough. But the biggest moment hadn't come yet. Because the next morning, when she walked into the briefing room, still damp from her post-flight shower, uniform crisp, hair pulled back like always, there was someone else waiting. Someone no one had expected to show up. And when he walked into the room, even the ones who once laughed stood. The briefing room was colder than usual. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of what had settled in the air. That heavy, electric stillness that comes after a storm, but before the sky decides whether to clear or crack open again. Elena stepped in, calm as ever, uniform flawless, boots polished, her damp hair pulled back into that same tight ponytail. Not a trace of drama in her posture, not even a flicker of tension. If she was nervous, no one could tell. But everyone else was. Because this wasn't a normal debriefing. Projected on the screen at the front of the room, frozen mid-frame, was footage from the day before. Multiple angles of her jet peeling off formation and diving beside Kelton's like a shadow tethered to a flame. One still image captured the moment they flew just feet apart, her wings tilted, stabilizing his descent with impossible precision. You could hear a pin drop. At the head of the room stood Colonel Braxtoner, career officer, square-jawed and by the book. It was no secret he hadn't supported Elena's placement in Echo Flight. In fact, several officers had heard him say outright, "Instinct has no place in combat. Protocol does." And now, here he was, arms crossed, staring at the paused footage like it had personally betrayed him. "Elena Monroe," he began without looking at her. "Call sign Echo 5. Disobeyed 2 direct flight commands, violated 5 standard maneuvering protocols, operated outside of chain of command during active simulation." There were nods from some of the older brass approval for discipline, for order. But Braxton wasn't finished. And in doing so, he continued slowly, turning now to the rest of the room, prevented the loss of one fully armed F-16, stabilized a pilot in distress, preserved the civilian safety perimeter, and executed a maneuver, he paused, eyes narrowing, that no one in this room could replicate. He looked directly at her for the first time. This time, it wasn't with disdain. It was something closer to awe, but tightly coiled, like he wasn't ready to admit what he was feeling. Pride, maybe, or guilt. "She should be court-martialed," someone muttered from the back. A captain, voice sharp with resentment. And then before Braxton could respond, it happened. The door opened. No warning, no announcement, just a man stepping inside. Every head in the room turned, every spine straightened. Because this wasn't just any officer. This was General Nathan Raw. The kind of man people only read about. A living legend, commander of the 9th Air Combat Wing. He hadn't attended a post-drill review in over a decade. He didn't need to. His presence alone carried the weight of judgment. But today, he came. And he came for her. The silence as he entered was complete. Even Braxton stepped aside, his arms falling to his sides. Raw didn't say anything at first. He walked slowly past the projection screen, scanning the frozen image of her daring maneuver. He paused beside it, hands clasped behind his back. Then he turned not to the room, but to Elena. And he didn't look down at her. He looked at her, directly, eye to eye. Then, without a word, he placed a hand flat against his chest and bowed his head. It wasn't a salute. It wasn't military protocol. It was something older, more human. Respect. Real respect. The kind that isn't earned through medals or shouted orders, but through action, through courage, through truth that cannot be denied. Eleanor didn't move. Her eyes glistened, just slightly, but she didn't blink. She stood her ground as steady as she had in the sky. Then Raw finally turned to the rest of the room. "If any of you," he said, his voice low but firm, "still question who the real pilot is in this room, you're not qualified to sit in it." And with that, he walked out. No ceremony, no fanfare, just silence. But that silence, it thundered louder than applause. Afterward, the footage was reviewed again, this time, not for violations, but for understanding. A maneuver that had no name was logged into official review. By week's end, it had one Vector Tether Protocol. Beside the name was hers, Monroe, Elena E. And from that day forward, no one ever called her Echo 5 again. They called her something else. The last pilot flying. Because in an age of war games and drone strikes, of simulation over soul, she reminded them all that there was still room for instinct. For the kind of pilot who doesn't just react but feels the sky shift and answers it with precision and grace. That kind of pilot didn't need permission. She just needed a runway. The sun was beginning to dip toward the Nevada horizon, casting long golden streaks across the concrete runways of Nellis Air Force Base. The hangars glowed faintly in the light-hulking silhouettes of steel and history. Inside one of them, Elena Monroe stood alone beside her jet. Helmet in hand, boots grounded. She didn't look like someone who had just rewritten the rules of aerial combat. No cameras, no medals, no brass bands waiting to shake her hand. Just the whisper of warm wind brushing past her flight suit, and the fading roar of an engine somewhere far off, perhaps Kelton, now safely back in the sky, offering his own kind of tribute. She started walking. Past the flight line, past the first row of buildings. No salute, no words. She didn't need them. Because Elena hadn't done what she did for recognition, she hadn't acted out of pride or ambition or rebellion. She'd acted because something inside her refused to watch someone fall not when she could do something about it, not when she knew how. For a few moments, she believed the day would end just like that. A quiet return to quarters, a hot shower, another name added to a mission log no one really read. But then something shifted. It started with the small things. A technician still holding a wrench paused and turned. A junior pilot set down his coffee cup, eyes narrowing as he watched her pass. Two officers in conversation slowly fell silent. Then, one by one, people began to stand. Mechanics, instructors, engineers in coveralls, pilots in fresh fatigues and older veterans with salt and pepper stubble. No orders were given, no announcement made. Yet somehow, instinctively, they all lined up forming a quiet corridor across the tarmac. Elena kept walking. Past faces she didn't recognize, past people she hadn't trained with. They didn't say her name, they didn't salute. They watched, not as skeptics, not as superiors, as witnesses. Then came the sound low at first, like a hum splitting the horizon. A sonic rumble. Elena didn't flinch. A single F-16 swept low overhead, cutting across the airfield in a clean vertical climb before vanishing into the clouds. It wasn't part of any drill. It wasn't a stunt. It was Kelton. His message was loud and wordless. We saw you. We know. She stopped walking. Just for a breath. Just long enough to track the jet's arc with her eyes, then bring her gaze back down to the path ahead. And continued on. By the time she reached the midpoint of the corridor, the salutes began. First a young sergeant, then a captain, then 2 more, then 10, uniformed men and women, raising hands not for rank, not for regulation, but for respect, pure and unfiltered. And then at the far end he appeared again. General Raw. No formal jacket this time, just an olive-green civilian coat and a quiet presence. No escort, no medals pinned to his chest. Just him. He stepped forward, walking toward her as the sun dipped behind the hangar. When he reached her, he didn't smile, he didn't blink, he just said, low and deliberate, "You didn't just land that jet. You landed every doubt we ever had." Her throat tightened, but she held his gaze, steady. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, then stepped aside. She passed him, moving through the sea of silence, through the line of salutes, and into the deeper stillness of the base, past the mission walls, past the old lockers still covered in stickers from forgotten deployments, past the stories never told, and finally into the pilot's lounge. It was empty. The overhead lights hummed faintly. The couch cushions were sun-faded. On the far wall, a row of plaques shimmered under glass, names engraved beside missions that had changed lives. Most were old, dulled by years, but one gleamed brand new. Monroe, Elena E. Vector Tether, Protocol First Recorded Execution. Civilian zone preserved, aircraft recovered, pilot saved. She stood before it for a long while. No one came in, no fanfare, and for the first time in a long time, she felt no pressure. No need to outperform, to outfly, to outprove. She had flown through the storm and landed something far greater than a jet. She had landed the truth. Out there in the world, people talk loud to prove themselves. They puff up resumes, shout down rooms, wave their badges and bark orders. But greatness doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes, it walks in quietly. It gets mocked, dismissed, ignored, and then one day it flies, without asking permission, and the world stops to watch. What do you think makes someone truly great? Tell us below from which city or country are you watching this story. And if stories like these still move you, you know what to do. We're honored to fly with you.